Some men measure their lives in cattle and seasons. Cole Barrett measured his in the things he'd lost: a wife, a son, a name that used to mean something in 3 counties. He thought the ledger was closed. He thought the last hard truth had already been carved into him. Then a boy he'd never met rode 40 miles through a spring flood to hand him a letter written by a dead woman he'd loved 20 years before he understood what love was. I know because I was the one who watched him read it. I watched his hands, which never shook, not when he set a broken leg, not when he buried his own boy, start to tremble like aspen leaves. And I understood in that quiet, terrible moment that a single page of a stranger's handwriting can undo a man more thoroughly than any storm. This is the story of what that letter said, and what it cost him to answer it. Stay with me, because the hardest part isn't the grief. It's what a man does when grief hands him a second chance he isn't sure he deserves. The flood came up the Purgatoire faster than any of us expected that spring. I'd been working Cole's outfit, the Barrett place, though nobody in Las Animas County called it that anymore, not since the bad years, for a little better than 3 seasons by then. Long enough to know the man silences the way you learn a horse's moods. Long enough to know he had 2 kinds of quiet: the working quiet, which was easy, and the other one, which came down over him like weather and made the whole ranch hold its breath. My name's Emmett Doss. I keep a journal, which the other hands rib me about, but a man who doesn't write things down forgets who he was, and I've forgotten enough already. So most of what I'm telling you, I wrote down that same night by lamplight, my hand not much steadier than Cole's had been. I want you to know that. I want you to know I didn't smooth it over after the fact. It started with the boy. We were out past the north fence, Cole and me, dragging a heifer out of a bog she got herself sunk in. Stupid animal, bawling like the world was ending, which for her it nearly was. Cole had his rope on her and his boots planted, and he was talking to her low and steady, the way he talked to spooked things, and I was up to my knees in muck heaving at her hindquarters, and neither of us heard the horse until it was near on top of us. The boy couldn't have been more than 15. Soaked through, gray in the face, riding a lathered bay that had clearly been pushed past what was decent. He half fell out of the saddle and stood there swaying, and the first thing Cole did before a word passed between them was let go of that rope and cross to steady him. The heifer could wait. That was Cole. Whatever else the years had taken out of him, they'd never touched that reflex. "Easy, son," Cole said. You're all right now." The boy's teeth were going like a telegraph key. "Are you Cole Barrett?" Something moved across Cole's face. "Careful, I am. My grandmother sent me." The boy fumbled inside his coat with fingers too cold to work right, and finally drew out a packet wrapped in oilcloth, tied with string, kept dry against everything the ride had thrown at him. "She said she made me promise, only to you, nobody else. She said you'd know what it meant." "Who's your grandmother, boy?" And the boy said a name. I didn't know it. It meant nothing to me. But I watched it land on Cole Barrett like a physical thing, watched his weathered face go still and then oddly young, and I understood I was standing at the edge of something that had started long before I ever rode onto that place. "Ruth," Cole said, barely a sound. "Ruth Calloway." She was Ruth Meade now for a long time. The boy swallowed. "She passed 2 weeks back. She wrote that letter before near the end, made me swear I'd bring it myself." The rain had picked up again, fine and cold and steady, and the heifer was still bawling in the bog. And Cole Barrett stood in the middle of all of it holding a dead woman's letter and not opening it. "Emmett," he said without looking at me, "get the girl out of the mud and get the boy up to the house. Dry clothes, something hot, see to his horse." "Cole, please." He didn't say please. In 3 years I'd never heard him say it. I did as I was told. It was near dark before he opened it. I know because I'd made myself a nuisance in the kitchen, drying out the boy. His name was Thomas, it turned out. And once the warmth got into him, he talked like a creek in spring, mostly about his grandmother, about a woman who'd apparently held a whole family together with hands that never stopped working. Cole had gone to the barn and not come back, and finally I couldn't stand it and I carried a lantern out to find him. He was sitting on an overturned bucket in the tack room with the oilcloth open on his knee and the letter in his hands, and he was reading it for what I'd learned later was the fourth or fifth time. That was when I saw his hands shaking. This man who'd stitched his own arm shut with a sailmaker's needle the winter the doctor couldn't get through the pass. Shaking. He didn't hear me at first, so I saw his face before he could put it away, and what was on it wasn't grief exactly. It was worse than grief. It was a man doing arithmetic on his whole life and coming up with a different sum than the one he'd been carrying. Cole. He looked up. His eyes were wet and he didn't bother hiding it, which frightened me more than anything. I had a life before this one, Emmett, he said. Did you know that? Everybody's got a before. No, he shook his head slow. Not like this. I had a whole life, and I threw it in the river. I sat down on a saddle rack and I waited, because you don't rush a man to the middle of a thing like that. Outside the rain kept on. Somewhere a horse shifted and stamped. And Cole Barrett told me about Ruth. They'd been young, younger than Thomas was now, near enough. Ranch kids on adjoining spreads back in the panhandle. Before Cole's people lost everything and scattered. He and Ruth had grown up half-wild together, and somewhere in there it had turned into the other thing, the way it does, quiet and total and certain the way you can only be certain at 17. We were going to run off, he said. Had it all planned. There was a preacher in Tascosa wouldn't ask questions. I was going to come for her the night of her birthday. Had a ring my mother left me. Had a horse and $40 and a head full of I don't know what. What happened? He was quiet a long time. My father, he said finally. He took sick that same week, bad, and there wasn't anybody but me to work the place and keep him alive, and Ruth's people, they'd got wind of it and they weren't having a Barrett, not with how far we'd fallen. Her daddy sent word, said if I came around he'd meet me with a shotgun and he wasn't a man who bluffed. Cole turned the letter over in his hands. So I made a choice. I stayed. I nursed my father 8 months till he died anyway, and by the time it was over Ruth was married off to a man in Kansas her family picked, and I told myself she was better off. I told myself I'd done the right thing, told myself that for 20 years. He looked at me. She never got the letters, he said. What letters? I wrote her, once things settled. I wrote her a dozen letters that first year, told her to come back, told her I'd made the wrong call and I'd spend my life making it right. Sent them to the only address I had. His jaw worked. Never heard a word. Figured she'd moved on. Figured she'd read them and decided I wasn't worth the trouble, and God knows she'd have been right. He held up the page in his hand, and now I understood why it had unmade him. Her family kept them from her, Emmett. Everyone. She never knew I wrote. She spent 40 years thinking I'd walked off and never looked back, and she still. His voice broke clean in half and he stopped and pulled it back together by main force. She found them, my letters. After her husband died, going through his papers, she found the whole bundle, never opened. Her own father had given them over to be hid, and her husband had kept the secret his whole life. The lantern hissed. I couldn't say anything. There wasn't anything. She wrote me this at the end of her life, Cole said, to tell me she knew now, that she'd always, he stopped again, started over, careful, like stepping across ice. That she never blamed me, that she'd had a good enough life and I wasn't to carry it. She wrote me a whole page telling me to set it down and forgive myself and be at peace. He folded the letter closed. 40 years I got it wrong, he said. And she used the last strength she had to tell me it was all right. That's the kind of woman I threw in the river. I want to tell you I said something wise. I didn't. I was 26 and I'd never loved anything the way this man was describing, and I sat there dumb as a fence post while Cole Barrett grieved a life that had ended before I was born. But there was one more thing, and it was the thing that changed everything. The thing that turned this from a story about the past into a story about what came next. Cole opened the letter one last time, to the bottom of the page, and he read it out loud, and his voice was steady now the way a man's voice gets steady when he's holding something too heavy to let tremble. There is one thing I would ask of you, Cole, if you have any tenderness left for me. Thomas is my daughter's boy. His mother is gone and his father is not a good man, and I am the only one who has stood for him, and now I am going too. He has no place. He is a good boy with a good heart and no one in this world to teach him how to be a man. I have no right to ask it, but there is no one else I would trust. Take him. Let some good come out of us after all. Cole lowered the page. Out past the tack room, in the warm kitchen, a 15-year-old boy was sleeping in a stranger's house, 40 miles from everything he'd ever known, waiting to find out whether the world had any place for him. And Cole Barrett sat in the lantern light with a dead woman's last wish in his shaking hands, and I watched him understand that his whole future had just walked in out of the rain, and that he had to decide tonight whether he had it in him to be brave one more time. He didn't say anything for a long while. Then he said, so quiet I almost missed it, I don't know if I've got it in me, Emmett, to love something again. I buried a boy. I don't know that I could survive burying another. And that was the truth of Cole Barrett laid bare. Not the grief over Ruth, the fear underneath it, the knowing that saying yes to that boy meant opening a door he'd nailed shut for a reason. He folded the letter and put it inside his coat, over his heart, and stood up, and I couldn't read his face at all. Go on to bed, Emmett, he said. I got some thinking to do. I went, but I stood a while at the bunkhouse door and watched the lantern move from the barn to the house and stop outside the kitchen window where the boy was sleeping, and it stayed there a long, long time. He didn't say yes in the morning. That's the part I think about most, all these years later, that Cole Barrett didn't do the easy, clean, storybook thing and come down at dawn with his mind made up and his heart open. Because a man who'd been hollowed out the way he had doesn't heal on schedule, and anybody who tells you grief runs a straight course never carried much of it. What he did was harder to watch. For 11 days, Cole and that boy circled each other like two dogs that hadn't decided yet whether to fight. He fed Thomas, worked him, taught him. The boy could ride but didn't know the first thing about real ranch work, and Cole showed him with a patience that would have surprised anyone who only knew the hard shell of him. But he held something back. I could see it. Every time the boy did something that pleased him, something that got under his guard, I'd watch Cole's face close up like a fist, watch him step back from the warmth of it like a man stepping back from a fire he was afraid of. And Thomas was no fool. 15 and orphaned twice over, and he could read a room better than men 3 times his age. He knew he was being held at arm's length. He knew he was on trial for a crime he couldn't name, and the not knowing was working on him. He's going to send me on, Thomas said to me one evening, mending tack he didn't have to mend just to keep his hands busy. Ain't he? He's just waiting till the road's dry. I don't know what he's going to do, Thomas. I don't think he knows. My grandmother said he was the best man she ever knew. The boy's voice had an edge on it, a 15-year-old's fury barely holding back a 15-year-old's tears. She was wrong about a lot of things, I guess. I didn't tell him he was wrong. It wasn't my place. But it about broke my heart because I could see both of them so clear. The man too scared of losing to hold on. The boy too scared of being left to reach out. And I could see the terrible, easy way this could end, with Thomas riding off down that dried-out road and Cole standing in the yard telling himself it was for the best, telling himself that same old lie one more time. The thing that broke it open wasn't a tender moment. That's not how it goes with men like Cole. It was the black colt. There was a 2-year-old on the place. A black Cole had been meaning to start, a good-blooded animal but hot, the kind of horse that's more trouble than it's worth until suddenly it's worth everything. Cole had told everybody to leave it be until he had time to do it right. Thomas didn't leave it be. I don't know exactly what the boy was thinking, proving something, I expect, to a man who wouldn't claim him. I came around the corner of the barn on the 12th morning to find Thomas up on that black in the round pen, no saddle, just a hackamore, and the colt already coming apart underneath him. It happened fast. The black went up and twisted and Thomas came off hard, and the worst thing, the thing that stopped my heart, was that his hand tangled in the lead and the colt was panicking now, dragging him, and a dragged man in a pen with a frightened horse is a dead man more often than not. I was too far, I'll carry that. I was too far and I was already too late. But Cole wasn't. I never saw a man move like that. He came over the pen rail like he was 20 years younger, and he didn't go for the boy, he went for the horse, which was the right call, the only call, straight at that panicked animal's head, and he got a hand on the hackamore and put his whole body and his whole will into it and turned 1,200 pounds of terror by main force. The colt stopped. Just stopped, shuddering, and Cole got the boy's hand free, and then he had Thomas up off the ground and was running his hands over him. Arms, legs, ribs, head, checking him the way he'd checked 100 hurt animals, and his face. His face was the face of a man who just watched it happen again, watched the ground open up, watched himself lose another boy. Except he hadn't. Thomas was alive, scraped raw and white with shock but alive, staring up at Cole with his whole heart in his eyes. And Cole Barrett, kneeling in the dirt of that round pen, holding a boy who wasn't his by blood and had every claim on him by love, Cole broke. Not loud. He wasn't a loud man. He pulled that boy against his chest and he held on like the world was trying to take him, and his shoulders shook, and I heard him say into the boy's hair, over and over, a broken litany. "You don't do that, you hear me. You don't ever do that, you don't get to leave. You don't get to leave too." And Thomas, that furious, frightened, twice-orphaned boy, grabbed 2 fistfuls of the old man's shirt and hung on and finally let himself cry. I turned around and walked back to the barn and gave them that. Some things a man's got no business witnessing. But I heard it later, what Cole said when the shaking had passed and the boy had got himself back together. He said, "Your grandmother asked me to take you. I've been 11 days trying to figure out how to say no," a long breath. "I can't say no. God help me, boy, I can't. I'm too old and too broke down and I already lost one and I swore I'd never, but I can't send you off. You're staying. You're staying and you're mine now, and if that horse or any other tries to take you from me again, I'll shoot it where it stands. You understand me?" And Thomas, thick-voiced, "Yes, sir." "All right," a pause, "all right then. That's most of it. There's not a neat bow to put on it, and I wouldn't insult you by trying." Cole raised that boy. Not perfect, there's no perfect in it, but he raised him, taught him the country and the work and the harder things underneath, the things Ruth had asked for without quite saying, how to be a man who stays, how to be a man who doesn't throw the good things in the river. I think Cole taught it better for having got it so wrong himself the first time. The men who teach you the most about not repeating a mistake are usually the ones who paid full price for it. He kept Ruth's letter, carried it in his coat till the paper went soft as cloth at the folds. Once, years on, I asked him if he'd ever written back, foolish question. She was gone, but I meant had he ever answered it in himself, and he understood what I meant the way he always did. "Every day," he said, "the boy's the answer. She asked me to let some good come out of us. So every day I get him right, that's the letter I'm writing back. She'll get this one." He almost smiled. "Family can't hide it from her now." Thomas is a grown man these days with a place of his own and children who called Cole Granddad, and never once thought to ask why an old cowboy with no blood tied to them had loved them like his own. Cole never told them the whole of it. Some things you carry so the young ones don't have to. I asked Cole once, near the end of his own long life, whether he'd ever made his peace with how it all went. Ruth, and the letters that got hid, and the 40 years of getting it wrong. He was quiet the way he got. Then he said something I wrote down that night, same as I'd written down the beginning, because it seemed to me the whole of a life was in it. A stranger's boy rode 40 miles through a flood to hand me a letter, he said, and it told me I'd wasted my one good love, and then it handed me another one and asked would I be brave enough to not waste it too. He looked out at the country going gold in the evening. I don't know that I've made peace with the waste, but I know what I did with what she gave me after, and I think that's as much peace as a man like me's got any right to expect. He died the following spring. Thomas was holding his hand. I don't know that Ruth ever got word, wherever the good ones go, but if there's any justice in it at all, somebody handed her a letter, and this one at last she got to read.